pastoral therapists that we think is having its 18th annual reunion. That's a lot more than most of your spa weekend meetings. And I want to begin by simply asking us all to introduce ourselves. Please tell us your names. And if you can't see everybody in the room, you can stand up and please. You can't see everybody. Stay where you are. Your name and where you're from. Would you start?
That's a big question.
I'm Chris O'Rear. I'm the Executive Director at the Pastoral Counseling Centers of Tennessee here in Nashville, and the Vice President of TNAPT.
I'm Sandy Waskovich, Craig's wife. He's at the same center, and I haven't been here for a while because I had a heart transplant 15 months ago. So it's good to be back.
That's what you call a real change of heart.
Yeah, I had a change of heart.
Craig Waskovich, I'm the center coordinator at our Clarksville office of PCCT and the pastor of the First Christian Church in Clarksville.
That houses.
That's what I was going to ask. Whoa,
Yeah.
great.
Gary Wedgwood, I'm a pastor of Mount Pleasant First United Methodist Church, and I relate to PCCT in Franklin.
I'm Sarah Grove. I'm a student at Tribeca, working on my master's in marriage and family therapy, and I'm going to be starting up my internship this month at the Pastoral Counseling Centers of Tennessee.
And she's receiving referrals.
I am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm Elizabeth Knowles Bagwell. I'm not officially a part of this august group. I'm a hospital chaplain here in Nashville.
I'm Tom Knowles Bagwell, and I'm at the Pastoral Center for Healing.
Yvonne Flesberg, I'm at Talking Place Pastoral Counseling Service and at Vandy here at Practical Theology.
Back further back. Yes.
We're Kent and Laura Kreiselmeyer. We are both Ph.D. candidates here at Vanderbilt in religion, psychology, and culture, and pastoral counselors, and also a psychotherapist at the Center for Symmetry.
And tap Jim behind
I'm Jim Kaufman. I'm from 2112 Curve Woodville Road, Ripley, Tennessee. I'm happy there.
I'm just Diane Martin, and I come with Murphy Martin, and he'll tell you all about himself when you get him out of here. And John comes with me, and I'm Donna Scott, retired clinical pastoral therapist.
And the mother of Becky Sharp, who's running for school board.
Yes.
Please vote for her.
A picture of my grandchildren. Thank you, whoever said that.
I'm Ron Richardson from Tupelo, Mississippi. I'm retired as Director of Pastoral Care at North Mississippi Medical Center, and now Parish Associate for Pastoral Care at the First Presbyterian Church in Tupelo. And I drove a long way today, so I'm very sensitive, so treat me like.
What is your needing right now? So we can get for you.
What are you needing? Something?
What do I need right now?
Yeah. So we can get for
That would be good.
you. Okay.
We got
A
wine.
glass of wine, a cookie.
Got wine.
Yeah, wine and cookies.
Wine.
Oh, you got some wine over there. Wow! Wine, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm Steve Gillespie, I'm the Director of Training at PCCT.
I'm Pam Carr-Brannon, and I'm a psychiatric nurse, but I'm here with Frank, who's in the Pastoral Institute, or no, Pastoral Counseling.
I'm Frank Brannon, in private practice, currently serving with wounded warriors up at Fort Campbell. So.
David Lovett, I am pastoral counselor in
private practice and also the associate rector at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
I'm Joe Kemper. I'm the pastor of the Congregational Holiness Church in Ducktown, Tennessee. I'm also an LCPT, and I work for Avalon Hospice as a bereavement coordinator and trainer, and I'm also their chaplain.
Hi, I'm Karen Johnson. I'm a physician epidemiologist, which is kind of out of place here, I guess. I do research at the University of Tennessee in Memphis, and I'm here with Ron.
She's my driver here. Ron Johnson, I'm a Methodist pastor and pastoral counselor at Bournemouth United Methodist Church in Memphis.
I'm Rod Kotitsky. I'm with the Pastoral Center for Healing here in Nashville.
I'm Murphy Martin, a pastoral counselor in McMinnville. And this month was my 42nd year of graduation here at Vanderbilt with our esteemed colleague over there, being pastoral counselor. Yeah. 1972.
I'm Carol Smith. I coordinate a couple of the centers for PCCT, Brentwood and Franklin.
I'm Peggy Way, and I'm on my 4th retirement. Retirements. First, I majored in Stuart Hildner, and after I finished him off, I majored in women. And after we took over the field, I majored in laity and the importance of the local church. And I've been unsuccessful in getting that underway. However, I keep working at it. And now I'm majoring in African Americans. And I have 14 doctoral students who are African American that I'm working with out at Argosy University. And they're my delight because I'm trying to see where our tradition, like we're all white folk here, trying to see where our tradition fits in relation to the rest of the stuff that's going on in today's world. Not only African American, I'm trying real hard to start working with the Latin community. I'm deeply hampered because I am not bilingual. So that's also a problem we have. How come we're not more bilingual? Anyway, so this is my 4th, and I failed all my retirements.
Liz, would you step in and introduce yourself, please?
Liz Zagatta, and I am at the Pastoral Center for Healing. That's marriage and family, pastoral psychotherapy.
Okay.
Treasurer.
And there's one other person out there.
Over here with Brian.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. I'm part-time at First Lutheran Downtown, the Minister of Pastoral Care, and I have a private practice on the licensed pastor.
Has that gotten everybody? Welcome to you all. It's wonderful to see these familiar faces and see a few new faces here too. And one of the faces that's familiar to almost everybody and is not new at all is Dick Bruehl. Dick has been a pastoral counselor for about 140 years. 143. Dick probably has had as much to do with nurturing people along in this journey as any man in the room right now. And when we were talking about what we wanted to do on Friday night, Chris and I, we both started talking about you, Dick, because we wanted someone who could tell the story of what's happened to us, as well as the context, of course, the story of what's been going on with you. And you're a natural for that. And we all, there's so many of us that have received Dick's supervision. There's probably people that can't be named that have seen him as a therapist, and it's been a long, rich journey for you, as we all know. And Dick was once my evaluator when I went up for diplomatic a number of years ago as well, one of the 3 evaluators I had in the region. So I have a personal connection with him, not only in that level, but on many of the leadership levels that we've shared along the way. And I forgot to bring the title of your talk up here tonight.
Well, it's changed about 6 times.
It's changed anyway. So, welcome, Dick, and thank you for consenting to do this. Come on, thank you.
invited to come and do this was a really special privilege. I do have lots of connections with a lot of you over a lot of years in a variety of ways, and I really value that very much. And, so it's like, I didn't know exactly who would be here tonight, so it's kind of having to figure out what would be good for people I've known for a long time, what would be good for people who didn't know me at all, and what might be good for students who had no idea about pastoral counseling or who I was or any of that other stuff. So anyway, I've prepared some remarks, and I'd like to get into that. I would really like to leave at least about a half an hour at the end for comments and comments, critiques, questions, anything that comes up. Going into this, I'd like you to keep in mind just 3 words that I think will be hooks that you can hang some of the things on as we go on through this, and will help you kind of see a direction as I go through some of my ramblings. I hope will be coherent and will have some meaning in themselves, but I want to give you 3 words to think about right from the start. One of them is crisis. The second one is vision. And the third one is authority. So just keep in mind these 3 words. You don't have to define them. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to do anything with it at this point. But crisis, vision, and authority. And kind of listen to that as we go on. Ron did a real dangerous thing asking me to come and do this, because you ask an old guy to go back and talk about his career and all that stuff. You may be here till whenever. Yeah. But I'll be more disciplined than that. I think I got this down to something. I'll make a pact with you. If I see your eyes glazing over, we'll stop and move on to something else. Or if I don't see your eyes glazing over and you need to tell me that your eyes are glazing over, raise your hand and say, or something like that. Because I don't want to bore the heck out of you. And I hope this will be interesting and engaging to you as we go ahead. Let's begin here. Throughout the ages of acts of pastoral care by clergy and laypersons have been born in crisis of one kind or another. The crises involve war, economic disaster and poverty, religious persecutions, and cultural upheavals which turned the world upside down and led to despair. Often when crises were more personal, involving family deaths and transitions, disintegrations of one kind or another, or some brand of general interpersonal nastiness, both lay and professional ministers have responded to persons in their distress. Through many traditional acts, programs, hospitals, and communal support have mitigated the impact of this stew of human pain. Most pastoral care and counseling was offered by persons to persons with greater or lesser effectiveness given many different factors. This was certainly going on in America as early as the 18th century during the Great Awakenings. In these times of cultural crisis, the religious fervor of people was running rampant. They were experiencing profound convictions of sin and need, desperation to take hold of personal salvation. This is still with us today. You see it in a lot of different places, in a lot of different forms. As Brooks Hollifield has said, we are mostly a nation of pietists, concerned with the status of our souls, even if we now call it self-realization or authenticity. It's instructive to read Jonathan Edwards' reflections on the psychology of religious affections as he sought to offer discernment and guidance to individuals experiencing intense emotional upheavals which shook them to the core. His authority was the biblical authority, and he tested the visions and experiences of people according to biblical standards. Suffice it to say that the record of persons in personal and spiritual crisis is long. care and counsel to fellow human beings as they wrestle with experiences which shake and challenge them at deep levels also is long and time-honored. Painting with a broad brush, the mistakes most often made in the pre-modern period were, in my opinion, born of something of the one-size-fits-all mentality in the application of moral and religious dicta to personal problems. In the days before much awareness of unconscious cognitive and emotional processes, before a clear awareness of the impact of context on human suffering, before a serious study of the dynamics of relationships, before a clear understanding of the role of genetics and the nature of intrapsychic dynamics, persons were often put into categories and treated with whatever guidance was at hand. The old treatments of, and I quote, "If you had more faith, prayed better, trusted God, knew Jesus in your heart, you would not be suffering," were applied much more often than we care to admit. In short, pastoral care was often authority-centered from the top down, if you will. The modern pastoral counseling and psychotherapy movement of the last 100 years also developed out of personal and cultural crisis. We have in our nation experienced at least 6 major wars, as I count them. I may have missed 1 or 2 in there. 2 or 3 depressions, depending upon your definition. The rapid rise of science and technology, the discoveries of depth psychology and psychoanalysis, the wholesale reconstruction of family life and roles, and a heightened awareness of our personal and national vulnerabilities. We've had plenty of opportunity to experience what Bruehl May called existential doubt, guilt, and despair. I'm going to move on into the origins of the pastoral counseling movement and I'm going to do this as a prelude to talking about my own journey in that. The history of pastoral psychotherapy was also born in personal crisis. Anton Boyson was chaplain at Worcester State Hospital in Massachusetts. He was an intellectually gifted man who was also schizophrenic. In his lifetime, he experienced multiple major episodes of full-blown psychosis, all of which involved idiosyncratic religious ideation. This experience he documented in his book, which is interesting reading at least from a historical perspective, entitled Out of the Depths. And also his other book was The Exploration of the Inner World, which has some fascinating stuff in it if you ever get time to read it. Upon his recovery from these psychotic travels, Boyson was highly productive in the research of religion and mental illness and in training ministers to assist persons in profound inner distress. My mentor, Carol Wise, was Boyson's student and followed him as chaplain at Worcester State Hospital, where Carol trained students for 10 years. Carol subsequently left Worcester and functioned as a counselor in the YMCA Counseling Center and as Minister of Counseling at the Hennepin Avenue Methodist Church in Minneapolis. Very large downtown Methodist church there, and he was one of the first to do that sort of thing in a Methodist parish at any rate. In 1948, Carol was appointed the first full-time professor of pastoral care and counseling at Garrett Theological Seminary. From that post, he had huge influence on many students, wrote several books, dozens of articles, started a Ph.D. program in pastoral counseling and personality, and became a recognized leader in what was then an embryonic movement. Just to give you a personal aside about how radical this appointment was at the time, I mean, this is so ordinary to us. Yeah, well, you know, I'm whatever. In 1942, my dad graduated from Garrett. And he told me, when he had been out in ministry for a long time, that the sum total of his instruction in pastoral care were 2 two-hour lectures on pastoral ethics. He graduated in 1942, folks, from a liberal, intellectually respectable seminary. I mean, just think about that. And here in 1948, Carol was appointed first full-time professor of pastoral psychology at Garrett. That seems dramatic to me. Well, let me give you a little personal contact with this whole thing that was going on. I arrived in Evanston, Illinois in the fall of 1961. Looking back, I see a somewhat depressed young man who thought he was coming to Garrett to get an MDiv, go on for a Ph.D. in religion, and teach in college somewhere. Like many young people, I was not certain of my future, my vocational identity, or who I was personally. And then somebody threw a bomb into my psyche. I would begin changing in a hurry when I enrolled in Carol Wise's basic required course entitled, I always remember this to this day, didn't even have to look it up, Personality and Pastoral Care C1. The rigors of this course were known to me only by reputation. I knew most students regarded it as the anatomy course of Garrett, which was to say, if you could get through this, you had an outside shot at graduating. If not, good luck. So I came to this course sporting a rather uninformed bias against psychology, growing out of my disaffection with a rather nihilistic approach by at least one major professor in psychology at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana. At any rate, I sat in this large class when this rather small man with a somewhat squeaky voice, who was barely visible behind a large wooden pulpit which served as the lectern in that room, started the class for the quarter. We were on quarters now, which is going to make one thing I'm going to tell you even more shocking. Carol began the class by giving us a case of parents, writing this up on the board, I can still see them doing it, of a family experiencing great distress at the loss of a child. Then he turned to the class and he said, what would it mean to offer pastoral care to these people? I and we hadn't the foggiest. We didn't know how to respond to this at all. So that was just the beginning. Now after 3,000 pages of heavy-duty reading, 3 tough exams, and many lectures and discussions, I was hooked, fascinated, and more depressed. I was moving toward an identity crisis, which would take several years and a good deal of therapy with a gifted therapist to sort out, and begin to come to some notion that in all this there was some sort of vocation forming in me. My therapist was wise enough to nurture me in this discovery of my own vision of who I was and who I was becoming, and I'm eternally grateful to him for that. During that first quarter, we read such tomes as English and Pearson's Encyclopedic Emotional Problems of Living, about 650 pages, chock full of every conceivable diagnosis, and it's kind of like psychiatry short course in one book. It was an amazing book. I remember reading a comprehensive synthesis of human behavior from a psychoanalytic point of view, Erickson's Identity in the Life Cycle, Edgar Jackson's Understanding Grief, Dorothy Baruch's One Little Boy, and several others, all of which were challenging and new to me. I remember spending a lot of times in the stacks, still depressed, reading this material and trying to understand myself better through it. It all got really personal, really fast. To give you a bit more of a sense of the environment in which we were nurtured, I'd like to share a part of an article which Carol wrote much later in his career, after he had been scalded over 35% of his body with third-degree burns by water from a hot water heater that exploded in his basement. His life with third-degree burns, as you know, hung in the balance for several days, and those who knew him were very concerned that he would die at that point. His reflections on his long healing experience will, I hope, give you a sense of why many of us were so excited about this new field of pastoral psychotherapy. Long before his trauma, this is what we were hearing from Carol in a variety of ways over the years. For us, this was defining what was spiritual and what was ultimately irrelevant. I remember one of the things, Carol, and you'll see why this fits, I think, in a minute. I remember after class one day, I was so frustrated because I couldn't get Carol to commit that there were any rational issues. He would say, no, there aren't any rational issues. So I got very frustrated. I was a rationalist, you know. I thought we could figure everything out and so forth and so on. And so after class one day, I finally went up to him, and here he is, and here I am. And I said, Carol, are there no rational issues? And he smiled at me and winked. So much for you, buddy. Have a good life. So, take a look. The first thing that you have on that handout, if you didn't get a handout, there's some over there in that box. This is from an article Carol wrote entitled My Encounter with Pain. It was published in a festschrift that we did for Carol, and we published some of his articles, and we thought were really representative of him in that. So here's the context. Here's a man burned over 30% of his body with third-degree burns, and now is heading into this healing process, we hope. So this is afterwards now. He says, now to summarize for the sake of clarity and at the risk of repeating, I was aware of a profound inner presence that seemed part of me, and yet to transcend me in the sense of having an existence and autonomy beyond myself. It had a vital relationship to the task of healing. Second, I felt no need for rational verbalizations or formulations of the experience. It was real and existed beyond all formulations and independent of them. It was to be accepted gratefully, to be appreciated and cooperated with. Third, there was a sense that the healing process was beyond my power and that of the doctors. But I was aware that my conscious self did have a part in it. I was not to be a passive object, but an active person in the process. My task was to understand and cooperate with what was going on inside of me, especially whatever promised to promote the healing of my wounds. My task was to maintain a relaxed mood, to accept whatever pain was to be involved, and to seek relief from pain only when necessary, so as avoid interference with my new inner strength. Fourth, there was a very firm conviction that the power which I was inwardly experiencing was more than adequate to the healing task, given proper external conditions. Many of these conditions were the responsibility of the hospital. I was not about to test this new inner conviction. I was not about to jump off the pinnacle of the temple and demand that my conviction be proven. It was rather there to be accepted. Finally, I inwardly felt that this new awareness did not guarantee a smooth process of recovery. There were and would continue to be many ups and downs in this process. Impatience at the slowness, boredom at the sameness of each day, some conflict with hospital routines and conditions. But I never doubted the direction I was moving, only I wanted to get there more quickly. This new and clear sense of communication with my own internal processes seemed to give me an undergirding strength to meet the daily irritation of being a patient, and at times it gave me strength to protest loudly and angrily at conditions. As I thought about this experience, it became evident that my inner processes were identical with those which are present in all healing, although often at an unconscious level. They are especially present in all genuine psychotherapy. whether by ordained or non-ordained persons. Their effectiveness lies in the attitudes and spirit of both the patient and the therapist. In genuine psychotherapy, the healing of the spirit depends on the understanding and cooperation with the same inner forces with which I was dealing. Any genuine pastoral care or pastoral therapy needs to be practiced with an awareness of this reality in human life. The pastor should remember that it is impossible for him or her to produce the experience in oneself or in others. There are no 3 steps to its achievement. I suspect the fact that my defensive ego was almost completely dissolved, leaving me on the bedrock of personhood, had much to do with it. An issue is whether the interpretation of such an experience is grounded in some preconceived theory of personality, or whether the experience is allowed to contribute insights to the understanding of personality. Well, we could go, I think it's great stuff. I hope you kind of groove with that, and I don't want to get too bogged down on that. But this to me was what we were getting from Carol in class, in his sermons, in the chapel, and in personal interactions. And it was very, very exciting stuff to me at that time and to many of us. It was interesting. One of the worst things that Carol had to deal with was that I believe the top 5 students in the 3rd year class, academic average and all that stuff, went into the Ph.D. program in pastoral psychotherapy. Other faculty was not happy about that. All right. Let me turn to AAPC. And a little broader than that, to the professionalization of pastoral psychotherapy, in which Carol and I and many other folk became involved. Some of this may surprise you. The situation was this. By 1960, there were well over 300 pastoral counseling centers of one kind or another operating in the United States. Some were started and run by well-trained individuals, and others not so much. Some were sponsored by churches, others by councils of churches, still others were formed around one or more charismatic individuals. The various denominations at the time were being flooded by requests to approve clergy for specialized ministries of counseling and psychotherapy. The denominations were, for the most part, totally at sea about whom to bless and whom not to bless. They were called upon to exercise an authority without knowledge or vision. So somebody had to provide both. Howard Kleinbell, whose name may be familiar to many of you, Carol Wise, Paul Johnson, and other leaders in the field decided to call for the formation meeting of AAPC in St. Louis in 1963. This was the beginning of AAPC. The task of this group was to set certification standards, develop codes of ethics, and begin the recruitment of many practitioners working in the field of pastoral counseling. Even at that time, there were a lot of people in private practice, which may surprise you. A lot of pastoral counselors being known as private pastoral counselors. This is a humorous aside, which I toss out because it was so humbling to me. I'll share a little humiliation with you. I was asked by a couple of other people who were doing private practice one time to do a workshop on private practice at an AAPC meeting. This one happened to be down in New Orleans. And as far as I know, that is the only workshop ever in the history of AAPC that was not assigned a room. I thought that was great. You think the unconscious doesn't live? Stuart Hildner, again, I'm sure Stuart Hildner's name is known to many of you, one of the founding fathers of the pastoral counseling movement, was the most vocal opponent of AAPC. He voiced great fear about the distancing of pastoral counseling from the parish base and remained opposed to AAPC for the rest of his life. Wayne Oates was also initially opposed, but after 5 years of the existence of AAPC, he decided to join and even was awarded a Distinguished Contribution Award. One of his distinguished contributions was changing his mind. Although he made many distinguished contributions. I don't mean to demean him at all, but it was lovely that he decided to change his mind about that. By 1964, many new members had joined and been certified by AAPC. My first meeting was in Dallas in 1967 after I got my Ph.D. degree from Garrett Northwestern, and was very well attended. Lively debate over many issues ensued. One of the hot-button issues had to do with the certification of ministers with some counseling training who were also working in parishes. This debate would go on for several years and in some ways continues to the present day. Peggy's been dealing with that in a way. And guess what else was a major issue? Yes? What is a pastoral counselor? 1967? What do you hear at Canuga last year? What is a pastoral counselor? So, you know, we moved maybe 10 steps down the road in that. I just thought it was hilarious. That was one of the first things that was being debated there in Dallas in '67 and continues to be debated to this day. Which says to me, it's probably an unresolvable tension. All right, let's see. Not too long after that, AAPC regions were formed, training centers approved, and the individual certification process was set in place, influenced both by the CPE certification model and the psychoanalytic model. The denominations increasingly turned to AAPC for certifying people who were applying for appointment or approval of the specialized ministry of pastoral counseling. Indeed, most denominations by the early 1970s accepted the fulfillment of AAPC certification standards in their blessing of persons in specialized ministry. This was a big deal. I'm going to talk some about what I think hope will be interesting to you. Not a very sexy topic, but I'm going to talk to you some about the certification process. From 1965 through the late 1990s, the certification process was at the center of AAPC's activity and responsibility. I became involved at the regional level in the early 1970s and would serve on the certification committee for several years before being elected to 2 terms as the chair and chief, I call myself the chief shepherd of herding cats, which is exactly what that job was. You know that, Tom, right? Does that pretty much fit with your experience with that? Yeah. After that, for me, came vice president and then regional chair for 2 terms. In those days on the certification committee, we would often meet with 15 to 18 people on a weekend, twice a year, trying to just deal with all the people who were coming through training programs and all that. We'd have as many as 10 to 12 people serving on committees during that weekend. Just it was a very, very big deal. I remember some of the bills for those weekends were like $4,500 to have the committee meet to deal with all the people that were coming up. All right, let me say a few things about this from my perspective. While not all certification committees were even-handed, non-sexist, or professional, we developed over time, on the whole, a very respectful, helpful, honest, pastoral, and supportive certification process. Of course, we experienced conflicts based on a variety of factors. Yes, countertransference lived even on committees. I do know that I worked very hard as its chair to teach and to try to facilitate making a somewhat daunting process as respectful and humane as possible without sacrificing rigor. When committees worked well, they provided me and others some of our most profound adult professional learning experiences. Most of the time, despite varied backgrounds, membership committee members reached a consensus about an individual candidate. This was truly a remarkable process to experience. It was amazing to be in the presence of persons who came from a variety of theoretical backgrounds, and a variety of religious backgrounds, a variety of cultural backgrounds, and so forth, who were able to work together at cognitive, emotional, and even unconscious levels to reach decisions. For many, many people, even those who did not pass the committee the first time, the process was truly a redemptive experience, helping them to solidify and sharpen their professional identities, to encounter their vision of who they were and where they were going with the authority of the committee. And it was quite a process to be over. Much later, when I was serving as vice chair of the certification committee with Jim Pruitt, he asked me to write an operations manual for the committee. He wanted me to put together all of the stuff that we had to know to process the responsibilities that we had on that committee. And he wanted it down in black and white, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth and so on. Now, if you will look at the second handout that I gave you, second page of that, you will see a page from the Southeast Region Certification Committee manual that I wrote that summarizes the competencies that typically have been expected of persons appearing before the certification committee. This was written in about 1997. I'll just run over these quickly. You can kind of look at it. I hope they will be at least of some historical interest to you, and even might be useful to you in thinking through how to make judgments about where people are in training processes and this kind of stuff as you go along. But here they are. Demonstrated capacity to identify and empathize with clients' feelings, which we would get through tapes and the interaction with the committee. An ability to establish effective working relationships with clients. An awareness of self in relationship to clients. Capacity to understand and deal creatively and therapeutically with transference and countertransference issues in the therapy process. An ability to make dynamic and genetic interpretations that are well-timed and usable by clients in their process of healing and development. An ability to enable clients to get into the room with the pastoral therapist rather than objectifying or intellectualizing feelings and relational issues. The capacity to provide a safe holding environment. The ability to be with clients in a collegial way rather than control the content and process of sessions. A growing and reasonably mature capacity to integrate theoretical, psychological, religious, and theological concerns with specific interactions with clients in the clinical setting. Demonstration of the integration of pastoral and psychotherapeutic identities that appears coherent, honest, and functional. An awareness of gender and cultural bias issues as they impinge specifically on a given case. And on the second page of that goes on talking about couple and family work, so forth and so on. You can read that and see Now, this represented the best estimate I could make at the time after many, many years in the certification process. Obviously, it has some weaknesses. It has certain biases which may or may not be relevant to many of you today. Some of the language may be different. You may use different language for different parts of this or whatever. And that doesn't bother me much at all. But you will note that the emphasis throughout this whole thing is on the therapy relationship. And however you think about that, or however you function, or whatever your theoretical orientation, or whatever, as far as I know, research says that's the main game. And that's what we were getting at in this. A lot of these things, you would be surprised to see how many people would come up for certification by AAPC, appear before our committee, and be very weak in several of these areas. And these are the reasons why people would say, you know, you need to go back and work on this. They couldn't get anybody in the room. It was all out here somewhere about this and that, problems out here and blah, 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 blah. And say, okay, how do you get this person back into the room so you can have an encounter with that individual? So anyway, I thought you might find that at least of some historical interest. Pastor, let's see, I want to leave at least a half an hour from this comments. This section is entitled AAPC, Pastoral Psychotherapy in the Future. Due to legal and some ethical issues in the certification process which were threatening to bankrupt AAPC because of lawsuits, AAPC no longer certifies professional functioning. Rather, certification requires the fulfillment of paper requirements, including education, supervision, and licensure in the mental health field. This change has been experienced by many members as a huge loss. Many have dissociated themselves from the profession and certainly from AAPC, or have become passive participants. Personally, I also experience this change as a big loss to the organization, the profession, and the mental health field in general. The AAPC process was, in my opinion, about the best, most thorough and rigorous certification process in any mental health field. I was astounded to learn that in Tennessee, for example, one could be licensed as a psychologist to do psychotherapy with no review of clinical competence whatsoever. This was true elsewhere as well, and still is. Many others, but certainly including me, believed in the AAPC certification process and poured our lifeblood into making it work. Though wounded by this loss, many of us have stayed connected and maintained a primary identity as a pastoral psychotherapist. This identification comes out of deep sources, which are both known and unknown, and that really doesn't bother me much anymore. And it wouldn't bother Carol either. So where do we go from here? Let me summarize some main points. We have kept the fires burning in a profession which from the beginning had a profound missional quality stemming from Boyson, Wise, Hiltner, Oates, Johnson, and many, many others. This mission and vision has been nurtured in many ways by the next generations which succeeded them. In our own ways and according to our own visions, we have attempted to be true to the integration of psychotherapy and religious life. This has not been superficial. At our best, we have avoided pat answers, formulations, easy reassurance, commands, and directives in our work. We have been duly cautious of moralisms, which can so easily creep into thought, theory, and therapy, both pastoral and secular. You know, it used to be neurosis was a description of a condition, That's what that's the way Freud used it, okay? Pretty soon, everybody was calling each other in derogatory ways neurotic, okay? Or if somebody was having a problem, it was very easy to say, you're just neurotic. Like that would do something, help somebody.
Now we call it borderline.
Borderlines, yes, that's exactly right. One of my beloved supervisors, Al Flarsheim, a renowned analyst in Chicago at the Chicago Psychoanalytic, and he went to a meeting one time in Chicago where they were presenting something on narcissistic personality disorders. This guy went on and on and on about this, how distasteful these people were, and so forth and so on and so on and so on. Finally, Flarsheim got up at this meeting and he says, what you're saying is you don't like these people. Which was what it was, you know. I don't like these people, so I'm going to call them all these things and tell you everything that's wrong with them and how they don't have a right to be on the planet. So there you go. I like to think through our own identity crises as individuals and in our association that we have kept before us the truth that genuine spiritual insight and change emerges not from our religious symbols, out of the religious symbols, that our symbols take on meaning out of our life experience, our own crucifixions and our own resurrections. This, I would argue, is the main gift we have given to the church and society. It is also the thing I fear will be lost. We have kept alive the notion that each person, every person on earth, in one way or another, no matter how modest or how grand, can catch a vision of a more whole, richer life and relationship. And we've kept that alive, and I hope we keep it alive. In short, it is this depth perspective which Carroll exemplified in his article, which is not about psychodynamic, religious, cognitive, or any of those systems. It is rather about soul or spirit or vision, if you will. Spirit can be nurtured, but never created or commanded. Neither can it be contained in neat, pat, or standard theological formulations. As the mystics say, the God that can be known is not God. Now, I don't know where we go from here in any grand way, but I do have a sense of some things that will go with us on the journey. That we will increasingly share this journey with others from other professions is probably only as it should be. Where the fundamental bedrock is the holistic appreciation for discerning the spirits in our crazy time, no matter our profession. I'm convinced that there will always be a need for discerning and disciplined persons who understand more than superficially the conflicts and grandeur of the human soul. Persons who know that life is in the vision. Authority can test the vision and keep it real, and it can also kill it. We need to know that. No less than our forebears, we live in a time of crisis and change. The effect of ill-conceived wars, of political and even religious narcissism, a time of frightening economic inequality will unwind in the next generations. Who and how we will be there to serve individuals and families, I do not know. Will we succumb to the cry for easy answers to their deep questions, or will we find a way to be with them in their struggles? Will we be there to bear witness to the presence which ultimately transcends crisis as we work out our salvation in fear and trembling? Professionally, we are finding more therapists, both religious and secular, who are seeking a deeper understanding of transcendent presence, the ultimate font of all healing, in relation to the concrete human, personal, and relational problems which we all are acquainted with. We can take satisfaction that we have played a role in defining the issues involved in the integration of spiritual and religious experience and psychic conflict. We ultimately work in a field which no one owns. This is true of all mental health professions. Though we want to protect our territory, quite naturally, we are moving forward and sharing our insight and practice. We have had, I think, a major impact in the growing awareness of the function of religion in personality, families, and society. I've always been struck that when I explain to lay people that pastoral counselors seek the integration of psychological, religious, and spiritual insights, most of them say, of course, it makes sense. Finally, what is a pastoral person? This will continue to evolve over time. I'm reminded of Richard Cheswick's advice of years ago that the psychotherapist must be acquainted with many listening contexts and many ways of hearing what people are saying, and be able to adjust according to the way the person is expressing him or herself, to be able to comprehend what the meaning of this is. I think it was Anders Angiel in the great book Neurosis and Treatment, who said that the job of the therapist is to help a client decode what they are about. Not to decode it for them, but to help them decode where the pain is, why they are in pain, what the pain is about, what it means, so forth and so on. I always like that. I think it's good. Kierkegaard was right, in my opinion, in the concept of dread, when he held that underneath all neurosis, sin, and sickness is the threat of psychic non-being or death. Alongside that, the dread, concept of dread. Alongside that, we are the powers of healing, growth, a quest for authenticity that Carroll described in his article. Those lie side by side together in the psyche of all of us. I hope you'll see the thread winding through this talk. The issue for the future, as it has been in the past, is not just the relationship between religion and psychology or spirituality as an answer to life's problems, or the application of religious resources to client issues. I get so sick of that term. That's just me. It is mostly about nurturing the human being we are called to work with and discerning the spirits, helping people to find a meaningful personal vision. It is about developing in ourselves the capacity to truly be with people as they work out their identity and often unconsciously seek the imago Dei, which is within the heart of all of us. I have some concern that in the clamor to fix it now, get it right, feel good, etc., we will lose the depth perspective in our work. The excitement of the early days of pastoral counseling movement was in many ways its radical nature within the ministry of the church. May it continue to be so. The Spirit still is to be revealed. So still we have a crisis, we have vision, and we have authority to wrestle with, and we always will. Thank you. You got 30 minutes? Good. Okay. You want to stand up and move around a little bit? I know you've been sitting for a long time. Why don't you do that? Get some water, blood in your leg.
Not even one.
Yeah, you do.
Frank, I'm doing well. How about you? Hanging in there. Looking good.
Yeah.
You look good. You do. Yeah. Try to stay home.
probably do. I would just have that.
Folks, let's call us back to order. I don't want to run over time here. I want to give you some time to make comments, questions, whatever you want to do. Throw right to me. So what's bubbling up in you as we take this little break?
Well, as a personal note, along with this history,
Okay.
I identify a lot with what you're saying, and then I work with Dr. Oaks at Southern Seminary, and with my mentor, got me in here at Vanderbilt with Mrs. Mills. Now, Oaks will not let me do the Ph.D. program at Southern. He said I had to leave the campus for 2 years. I've been in school straight. And he was in contact with Mills about something. I don't think he's down here or what. Called me to his office and said, in fairness to you, there's an opening, which, you know, you're my supervisor. There was an opening down there. Give Listen a call, gave me his number. So I want to just, in preparation for coming here and listening to you, I reread a couple of books and I want to, if you're not familiar with Allison Stokes' Ministry After Freud, you want to look at that again because that's a branch of what you're talking about. You know, so that's a very interesting concept of how it affected the pastoral counseling. And the other one, just of course you mentioned Dr. Wise, but is Dr. Oates' autobiography is called The Struggle to Be Free, My Story and Your Story. And what he called that he was fighting against and was always rebellious was what he called factory education. And that he felt like the pastoral counseling movement and pastoral theology in seminaries was a much more personal, hands-on, the CPE program model. And I looked up something the other day, and bore you with this. He said when he was first at Southern in the 40s, he got an A on a paper, but there was no comment. So I looked up one of my papers the other day. I did for him. He gave me my grade, and he wrote about a half a page of it. You know, so he didn't believe in this factory education. So
I always wrote about a half a page.
Yeah.
Thanks. Those are valuable comments.
Dick, what are you saying that AAPC no longer does certification?
They do certification. They do not, this is something to be defined carefully. They do not certify professional functioning. You know, it used to be that people would say, you are a certified pastoral counselor. We certify, we have examined this person, that they have passed the committee, that they are a full-fledged member of AAPC, and they are certified at this level, and this level assumes certain competencies and that kind of stuff.
But they're still doing fellow and diplomate?
They are, yes. But, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd like to speak to that a little bit, just because right after you left being one of the major leaders in AAPC was when I began to be on the board of directors and was the certification chair of the region and the certification. And one of the things that I heard a lot was people like you saying, I miss the old way of certifying people. And it was interesting, you were talking about, I used the two words, I said, when I was certification chair, I would say to the committee every year, or 2 or 3 times a year, we're about hospitality and judgment. We're to find a balance between those two. And that was the same thing you virtually said about the old way. What we began to realize is that what had been pulled out from under us was the ability to make a decision as a committee sitting down face to face with that person. By the time we sat down face to face with them, we had already approved them. but the approval itself still included a rigorous examination of their work with the client that was tape-recorded or videotaped. And so that.
But if they yell at the client through the whole session, you can't say you can't join APC.
No, we could tell them that was not, we could tell them that if they were not doing good enough work, we were gonna send them back and say, we want you to work on that. But we had to do it over the telephone.
Okay.
All right. So there's still a certain rigor to it, and the fact is that even when they've passed and they come and sit down in the committee, they're nervous wrecks. And so the anxiety still gets dealt with.
So you're saying the committee has already made their decision before they sit down with the candidate?
That's right. But the decision-making process in itself is still treated with a whole lot of rigor. They have to have a really well-written paper, they have to have a really good description of what goes on in the counseling session, and they have to demonstrate in the counseling that there's integrity between those three things.
Well, the perception of the group I was talking about, the perception of a lot of people my age was that we lost the ball game.
Right, and that was one of the things I ran into a lot, and one of the things that we were trying to correct is to hang on to the judgment part.
Right. Go ahead.
But as you're speaking, Ron, what you're talking about, holding on to the judgment part without the benefit of the kind of face-to-face kind of conversation and formation that Dick was referencing, that even if one did not pass a committee, there was some sense of engagement, that there was a sense you could look at the person and see on their face how it was registering, or in their body language, what it meant, and where to work it through until there was a mutual understanding of where the areas of work and improvement were required, rather than having this more flat, a videotape or an audio tape, to me it still flattens out the process, rather than having this mutual conversation prior to judgment. And I've been on both sides of this, and I just think there's something about a formation, and that's, Dick, what I want to come back to, is how profound the formative process that you described was for you, has been for us, and how do we keep that relational conversation? I mean, I'd be curious to just see how many of us in this room have some kind of relationship with you. Raise your hand. Somebody has had a professional relationship with Dick Bruehl. Okay? Now, you can't just get that by sending in papers and reviewing a video audio tape and calling yes or no, up or down. There's something we're missing with this ongoing formation over time if we just check boxes and send in papers or tapes or film.
What I remember in the late 70s was a mentoring supervisory process and developing relationships with various supervisors. I was in Oklahoma for a while, then I came to Tennessee, got acquainted with PCCT early on, and just keeping, I also felt there was a community.
Right.
In a sense, I said, those are my people. I understand them, they understand me. Where as a pastor, you don't always have that experience. Lay people don't always understand what your experiences are, and other pastors sometimes don't even know each other. Don't have time.
I think it's the element of care that, excuse me, I'm sorry. The element of care that you're discussing is what you're describing, I think, is core.
There was a covenant relationship.
Yes, definitely.
That's how it felt to me.
One of the things that seems to me to be what I consider to be a problem with AAPC has been a shift into a kind of emphasis on organizational survival, and to do whatever is necessary in order to generate revenue to maintain the organization. And that's the part about AAPC that has grieved me the most, because that has, in my opinion, sense of bondedness with one another. We didn't just do pastoral counseling, we are pastoral counselors. That sort of thing just kind of vanished when the shift became one of organizational survival. And that seemed to happen as a function of all those lawsuits and that you mentioned, you know, we almost went out of existence because of all of that sort of thing. So there were all of these moves to maintain the organization, and the long-term consequences I have grieved over.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of comments about that. I think we made two very critical mistakes, at least two critical mistakes, as an organization. One is we went after the brass ring of insurance coverage. And I think that was a big mistake. That took us out of the realm of church development, church financing of pastoral counseling centers, supporting pastoral counseling centers. You know, counseling centers would get farther and farther away from any kind of interaction with, for fundraising with churches and this kind of stuff. And I know we have problems with that too. That's not just some grand answer, but there's something in that. It always seemed to me that was probably a critical mistake, that we went after that whole deal and essentially wanted to become kind of junior doctors. Junior doctors rather than pastoral psychotherapists. You know, we wanted health insurance. We wanted to have medical necessity. Back in the managed care days, you know, people telling you, you can have 10 sessions with this person. Yes, we know they're in unmitigated grief, and they have been for a year and a half, and they can't seem to get out of it, and they're trying really hard, and they need a lot of help with this. Oh yeah, well, you got 10 sessions, and you know, maybe 5 more, and what? By the way, what medications is the person taking, and blah 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 blah, you know, all that stuff. So that, I think that whole deal was a bad deal. Ron, go ahead.
Dick, I vacillate back and forth with this thing. You know, I look at clinical psychologists, I look at social workers, I look at all the other disciplines who are so well organized. And they are, you know, have the blessings of the state. They simply know who they are and what they're doing as an organization. And I sometimes get jealous of that. On the other hand, I vacillate the other direction. And I know John Patton worked on this as much as anybody, trying not for ministers to think of career or specialist or professional or any of those kinds of words. We're a pastor. And I get into this thing of, as I shared earlier, when I do what I do there in Tupelo, Mississippi, I mean, this is not boasting or anything for myself. Folks look at me and say, he's good. He knows what he's doing. I know better. I know that I wasn't born that way, with all these gifts. I was trained in AAPC and clinical pastoral education to do what I'm doing. They don't have a clue about any of that. And I make my mark being who I am in that community. And folks come to me and talk about me being a community leader and all those kinds of things. And of course, I sometimes want to just, you know, eat it up and feel good about it. But, you know, the more humble part of myself says, you know, I know where I came from. And that pastoral identity in that community, about as much as I need. To heck with the organization.
Yeah. Jim, I know you've been trying to get in. Thanks, Ron, I appreciate that.
I appreciate your sharing your experience. It's very, very nicely done. And I'm grateful for it, for your statement, but even more so for your contributions. My son gave me a book a few months ago for Father's Day, and the book was called The Radicalism of the American Revolution by Gordon Wood. It won the Pulitzer Prize, I believe. But one of the things that you said, I was touched by the theme of authority that you expressed. And I'm mindful of how powerful it is to have a mentor like Carol Wise, and to hear the story of your relationship with him. That's a very powerful story. And it kind of creates a nucleus of something that you keep alive. Now, I'm aware that that's what I experience with mentors that I have had. Peggy Way is one of my mentors. And
He's my
how
oldest
special.
demon student.
I'm aware of how special that a relationship like that is in making for a destination of some sort. Now, in this, I'll return to Wood's book, and this is what I'd like to hear your reflections on. Wood suggests that the people who were behind the American Revolution were radical in their thinking. And he begins to process a whole host of ideas about how that radicalism was functioning in the culture that was present in the colonies. And it's a very cogent argument. But primarily what happens is these special relationships of Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Hancock, these aristocratic figures, these people who were special in their thinking, represented a return to classical thinking and classical ways of operating. They picked up the Greek and Roman ideas about the way society is supposed to function. And so they have this wonderful period of time in the late 18th century in which they pull off this thing of working together to put together a notion about a country. And then what happens? Their ideas get taken seriously. And the idea, for example, of equality, and their arguments against monarchy, their arguments against patriarchy, began to really be taken seriously, and family relationships began to break down all around. Everybody wants to get away from their father. Everybody wants to establish identity of their own. And pretty soon, people are elected to office who are more dedicated to the concept of equality. And you lose the aristocratic leaders. You know, whereas the merchant in Richmond was seen as not worthy of office in the Continental Congress. But now he is a person that is, with equality, he deserves as much as Jefferson.
You bringing this back to AAPC?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
We're gonna run out of time. I didn't want you to have to get cut off right in the middle of things, so I want to make sure we
Well,
get to your point.
what I'm saying is that is it reasonable to hold on to the images that we have of the special people and relationships? Is that the seed that you see we should be about in creating a future for pastoral counseling? Because right now, it's, you know, if you want to be a pastoral counselor, it's probably wiser to go and do a counseling degree first.
Right, yeah, it has changed and it is changing, and will continue to change. And I don't know how that's going to go, Jim. I mean, I don't know exactly how that's going to go. Went to the 50th anniversary meeting last year in St. Louis of the AAPC. There was a lot of vitality in that meeting. There were a lot of people there, and it was very interesting. And the programs were just first class programs. I went to probably 6 workshops that I thought were just outstanding. And everything from new models of care in North Carolina to wounded warrior stuff, and with the chaplains speaking to the issues of returning soldiers, which I think is, you know, Frank, it's going to, we just got the tip of the iceberg as far as the impact of all that stuff on families, individuals, God only knows what. I mean, that's, I don't know, I can't even fathom all that. And it isn't just about the VA, it's about how people find somebody that care about them, you know, really. So, I don't know, Jim. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I guess the one thing I guess I do feel is that the origins of psychotherapy and the origins of pastoral psychotherapy and the stuff that Boyson was doing was very radical. I mean, he got into wars with people like Russell Dix, who thought there was nothing to any kind of psychic determinism or any of that stuff. And he had to fight his way in, and Carroll had to fight his way into the faculty. I mean, they hired him there because they needed somebody they could say was a you know, pastoral counseling type person there. And then all the, pardon my expression, the shitstorm happens. Because, why does it happen? Well, it happens because people had their own ideas about what theological education was. I sat right in this room when Liston Mills and Chris Meadows and I sat with the faculty at Vanderbilt University and had to fight our way through to starting a Ph.D. program here. I mean, it got bloody. You know, we were called everything but human beings. You know, it was very nice and high level swearing. Nonetheless, yeah. So all I'm saying is that and that's what I was hoping to communicate. There's always been a kind of radicalness about this, particularly in the church, but in society as well. I mean, if you're sitting down and talking with soldiers about PTSD and all the stuff that goes along with that, that's radical stuff, you know? 150 years ago, nobody did that. They just said, oh, well, people had, what was it?
Soldiers' heart.
Yeah, battle fatigue.
That was the next war. Soldiers' heart, the Civil War.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, you know what I'm saying, it's always been pretty radical stuff, and it's that radicality that I think is pretty interesting, exciting. Go ahead, you ready to be done? I'm sorry, Maggie.
We picked the right person, didn't we, Chris? Thank you so much.
I would like to hear what Peggy has to say.
Yeah.
Well, I just say 1 minute, that at the end, Dick summarized Sue Hiltner's point of view, just wanted to point that all out to you. Because basically what he said at the end was that the generic discipline is care, and counseling is a subset of care. And the radicality lies when we claim that human beings are born into periods of peril, and that there is care that has to go on from the beginning of history, healing, sustaining, guiding, reconciling, all that old stuff is exactly the kind of stuff that goes on when you read the New York Times tomorrow morning. And the generic issue there is not specialization in counseling. The generic issue is really how do we care with and for human beings who are living in the kind of world that we all are familiar we're living with. And that's where I think the creativity lies. I just wanted to use Sue Hiltner's name. You know, you all know Seward and Carol and Wayne didn't really like each other. No, they were our founders, and I was fortunate enough to be part of them not liking each other. And we shouldn't be surprised. Do you remember Freud and Adler and Jung? I mean, they hated each other. So in the midst of that, they went on and did radical things, all of which had to do with helping another human being maybe even live this much more meaningfully in the world. So I just wanted to make sure that Bruehl said that. I'm sorry, Dick, I'm teasing you.
Thank you. Very brief announcements. One is that our program tomorrow